met George Scott this year and started talking about what we can do to better support our students, emotional, mental, and the social emotional learning side of things, and how we can better serve and support the needs of our students. Our students are different than they were in the past, and as times change and as our students change, we need to be doing different things as educators to support them. So we also recognize that what you might be seeing at home and how we can be supporting our students early, you know, when even starting in kindergarten and at home and at school to better provide for them is something that's important, and that's why we wanted to bring in George Scott to talk to our parents in a proactive manner. We're fortunate George is presented across the state as part of the Call for Action and the Traumatic Loss Coalition. We wanted to bring him in before we had those tragedies to talk about ways we can prevent them from happening, to look for warning signs, and give you an opportunity to ask him questions about things that might be happening, things that you might be seeing with your students, on a sports team, at home, with their friends, and it's an open dialogue. So without further ado, I want to introduce George Scott.
So I'd like to set a tone for this as more of a conversation. And if you can, try really hard to make sure nobody else in the room exists but you and me. So it's my conversation with you about your children, or the kids next door, or your guide kids, or your grandkids, somebody in your family that you're concerned about perhaps, or you want to make sure you're in a good place with them. And you're really not worried, but you know it's a difficult world out there for our kids to navigate. So as I spend my time with you tonight, I want to personalize the conversation to you. And here's where I want to begin. I want to begin with this story, which is really a helpful story, I think. So walk with me through this. Imagine that there's a river, that if you stand on the banks of the river, it's a fast-flowing river, and it serves every purpose to this little village on the banks. Recreation, food, water, transportation, everything happens because of this river. And if you go there early enough on every given morning, before the sun rises, you'll see a fisherman on the banks of the river. Imagine that in the serenity and calm of the morning. Well, one morning while this fisherman is sitting there, standing there, enjoying the morning, he hears a scream, and he looks up, and there's a kid in the river floating down this fast-flowing stream. And he does what we would do. He tosses down his pole, he swims out, he does the best he can. He gets to this kid, saves this child's life, brings that child back to the banks, and there's a big celebration in the village. Saved one of our kids. Well, as the story is told, a few days later, that same scenario repeats itself. And this fisherman does the exact same thing. He swims out and rescues another child. There's a big celebration in the river. If we keep on going forward in this story, we're going to come to a time when he's out there and he hears two screams because there are two kids in the river. And he swims out, but can only save one. He brings that child back to the banks of the river. There is no celebration because they lost one of their kids. So the chief of the elders calls a meeting of all the thinkers in the tribe and poses this question: how are we going to solve this problem? And they begin to do what we do. We begin to come up with ideas of how to solve this problem. Some said more fishermen. Some said train them better. Some said put a canoe out in the middle of the river so kids can hold on to it to save themselves while we get to them. Idea after idea after idea. After a while, the chief stands up and there's quiet in the room. And he says, they're all great ideas, but I have a question to ask you. It's the same question I have to ask you. Why the hell are so many of our kids in the river? That's the question. Because we as parents know that sometimes we find our kids in really difficult situations for a variety of reasons that we're going to talk about. How they get there, is there anything we can do about it? How do we help keep our kids healthy? So let me ask you a question. How many of you, as a major goal as a parent, you want your kids to be happy? Yeah, right, everybody. I have never been in an audience of parents where every hand wasn't up. Yep, want my kid to be happy. What if I said to you that's not the best goal to have? Suppose I were to say to you, move that down to number 2. Leave space for number 1. Because I would suggest that if you can raise kids to be healthy, then happy follows. But if you raise kids with the sole purpose of being happy, it's too elusive. Life does too many things, and it comes and it goes. And if you're not healthy enough to get it back, keep your head above water, we find ourselves, our kids find themselves in difficult situations. So what we want to do is we say, so how do we do that, George? How do we do that? Well, here's a big concept. This is a big idea. And by the way, I want to remind you folks that this is being videotaped tonight. So if you're in a witness protection program or you're supposed to be someplace else, but you're here, then just hide your face when the camera pans. Because what we're going to do is we're going to take that and we're going to put it on the website, because there may be some folks who wanted to be here, couldn't be here. We want to get as much information out to the Lawrence community as possible. Because what we know this is the healthier the community, the healthier your own kid is. So we want to be able to spread this wealth of this information. I think this is an important concept, right? What it means is how you see and understand something affects what you do about it. So here's a slide that kind of takes that further, and that is, if you misunderstand what you're seeing and hearing and you respond to that, you either have no positive effect or you can make matters worse. Like, for instance, this one here. So, what is it that you see? Just take a look at that. What's your interpretation of that picture? And some of you would say, yeah, well, that's a no-brainer because I see the duck, right? There's the duck's bill right there. There's his eye, there's his bill. And other people will say, well, that's not what I see. I see the bunny rabbit because there's his eye and his nose and here are his ears. So your interpretation affects your response and your understanding. Here's another one. Try this one. So do you see an old woman or do you see a young girl? And for some, the old woman jumps right out. There she is. Here's her mouth and her nose and the bump on her nose and her eye with her bonnet. And some will say, you got it all wrong, George. I see the young girl because here's her profile with her ear. That's actually her necklace, not the old woman's mouth. Your interpretation affects your understanding and what you do. I'll give you one more. In this next picture, the question is going to be, how many faces do you see? If you're sitting there saying, what faces? You and I need to talk. So take your time. How many faces do you see? Now the answer is 10. Right? 10. So let's go up on the left side of the tree. Here's number 1. And then here's number 2. Facing number 3. Number 4 with the mustache. And number 5 with the glasses. 6 with the beard. 7 looks like an older lady with her glasses. 8. And there's 9. And there's 10. Interpretation drives your intervention. It affects what you do. And with adolescents and the culture that they're trying to survive in, a lot of times what they show us is either only partial truth or we don't quite understand it. And sometimes we get scared. Let me take that back. Lots of times we get scared. Our fear drives us a lot because we want our kids to be safe. So, interpretation drives intervention. We got to be careful of the misinterpretation. And that's part of what we want to do tonight. In the conversation, we want to give you enough information that you can look at your kids differently and perhaps respond differently in an effort to keep them healthy. So, the first question is, how do our kids tell us what's going on? What's that about? Well, they only have 2 ways. There's one way they actually use their words. That'd be an example, right? You could sit with your child, young or older, and sometimes you can engage in conversation so they use their words to tell you what the status is and what's going on. Now, more times than not, however, particularly if you have middle school, high school kids, you have to interpret their shrug or the single word of nothing went on in school today. How was school today? Fine. What'd you do different? Nothing. Because they don't give you a lot, right? Sometimes it's this, sometimes it ain't. So what's the other way? Well, the other way is they show us with their behavior. And this is where it could be a little tricky. We have to be able to decipher what it is that we see. Here's an example of that we kind of understand what the emotional being is for these kids based upon the behavior that we observe. Whether it's a fearful look, an overwhelmed look, deep sad look, or this anger at this video game, it's how we interpret what we see. We're going to come back and revisit this a little bit. Now, sometimes they use both. Parkland kids use both. They went on this tear across the country verbally to take a stand. But we also saw in their behavior the standing for something. So sometimes our kids do both. And we have to then interpret what we think we understand. Interpretation drives intervention. Now, I want to take you back to a story that happened. In fact, if this event had not happened in my life, I probably wouldn't be here talking with you in the way that I will tonight. 2013, it was the spring, it was this season. And at the time, in addition to some of my other work, I was a coordinator for a traumatic loss coalition. Now, what that does is, when something terrible happens to one of our kids, the TLC, the Traumatic Loss Coalition, frequently is invited into the district to support the adults and the kids. Sometimes it's an illness, and sometimes it's an accident, and sometimes it's a homicide, and sometimes it's a suicide. Well, it was a Sunday evening in the spring, and I had gotten a call that Sunday evening on my cell phone from a superintendent in a small town down in southern Monmouth, because I was the coordinator down there. And when I talked to him, he said, would it be possible for you to come down to my district tomorrow morning? I said, sure, what's going on down in your district? He said, well, one of our 13-year-olds took his life over the weekend, and we're not quite sure what we're facing tomorrow at the middle school. So I made some phone calls. Our team went. We met early. We always go early because we want to get there before the teachers and the kids get there to make sure we have right information, current information, and we have a plan of how to respond to help the beginning of healing in that middle school that day. And we did the protocol for the day. And at the end of the day, this young boy's counselor asked if I would go with her to visit home in order to express the district's sadness to Mom. All part of the work when something terrible happens. And I can tell you that I had been on lots of responses prior to that. I've been part of the TLC since 2001. So it's been a long time, and I did a lot of responses, including suicide deaths. So the events weren't different, although each one hurts differently. But I was different. The events that day changed the way that I thought and I felt about kids. My kids, your kids. As I was driving home, now I live here in Mercer County, live in Ewing. I was in Monmouth. I was driving 195 west, about an hour and 10 minutes coming home. Usually there's music playing or the radio is on or something. Not that day, and that's where I knew it was different. My interpretation that I was different because I was in complete silence. I was in my head the whole time. I was in my head asking myself this question that I'm going to pose to you tonight because it's at the heart of what we will discuss. I kept saying to myself, George, how is it possible that between this boy's birth and just 13 years, he can't do tomorrow? How's that happen? And then as I thought, and later as the weeks went on and the months went on, and I would talk to people and I would research and I would read, what I realized is that's probably the ultimate tragedy for a family, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that goes on with our children that scares us, worries us. We lose sleep some nights because of it. We don't always understand is what I realized. And then what I realized is this, and I'm going to walk you through this pretty quickly. When we don't understand, I mean we the adults, when we don't get it, when we don't understand, sometimes there's suffering among our kids. And sometimes some of our kids die. When we don't understand among us, sometimes there's suffering among adults. And sometimes people die. Let me give you an example of that. Here's one, like ingesting lead, right? Now, when I was growing up, I never thought about lead in the water. You just drank the water. In fact, when I was a kid, it was so bold back then, we used to drink the water out of a garden hose, right? And my God, you would never do that today. But maybe that explains about some of the quirks of my personality. It's the garden hose. Never worried about lead. We never worried about lead until Flint, Michigan happened. Then we were worried about lead. We began to ask ourselves, is there lead in our water? Because what we know is, if there's lead in our drinking water and our babies are drinking this lead, what we know is it creates problems here and brain damage here. Heavy metals in the body are deadly. And what we know is that towns right here in New Jersey, like North New Jersey, is suffering through lead in the water. We can't have that. And when we understand what it causes, there are things that we need to do to make it better. Here's another one. Any tobacco products. When I was growing up, back in the day, I never thought I'd be saying that. That's usually what my grandparents used to say. Well, back in the day, I remember when I first started my job in education, I could walk into the faculty room and I couldn't see or breathe. I know that when I went to my family doctor, chances are he had a cigarette hanging out of his mouth while he was doing my examination. It's just the way it was. But it's not that way now. Because in the absence of understanding, we had a lot of suffering. And maybe you did in your own families. Maybe there was a lot of lung cancer in your own families. Maybe you lost some people dear to you because of that. And what's amazing is we're revisiting that, right? That's over the table over there, right? That's the whole vaping thing. If we don't understand it, if we believe the pitch from the kids that it's just vapor, then we think, oh, what's the big deal? It's just vapor. But what we know is they vape other things. I'm not saying they're bad kids. What I'm saying is there are reasons why they're ingesting tobacco products into their bodies. Then there was another one. How about that? See, that one wasn't familiar to any of you until you watched TV, and now you know that mesothelioma is something that you can sue a company for. But the seriousness of that is if you inhale asbestos fiber, you can get lung cancer and die. See, in the absence of understanding, there is suffering. So I did my research, and then I came across some things that, quite honestly, have never been on my agenda. In the 30 years I was in public education, that was never part of it, and that is this one. It's the effects of toxic stressors on your children and on you. So let me begin with the obvious question. How many of you don't have stress in your life at all? Exactly. That's the answer I get all the time. It's like, dude, what are you kidding me? I'm stressed being here tonight because I got other things I should be doing. I get it. But I'm not talking about that kind of stress. See, stress is a part of living in this culture. And sometimes we can channel it and we do better. Like, coaches really rely on how do you get that excitement about an up-and-coming game in order to get yourself going? How do you pump yourself up for that game to enhance your skill, no matter what the sport? Sometimes our kids learn to do that in anticipation of an exam or a project. That's the good stuff. Bad stress is not terrible, it's just bad. And it doesn't linger, we can get rid of it. But the toxic stress. See, it's the toxic stress that gets created in the environments of our children that gets inside the body and does some pretty horrible things. And we want to talk about that. Because those horrible things, in fact, get in the way of our children's well-being. So many more of our kids not feeling good enough. Not enough of anything. It doesn't matter what they look like or what their achievements are, it just never feels enough. Sometimes it melts our little ones down. Right? They just kind of collapse in the corner and they're just kind of holding themselves together, but we're really not quite sure what's really going on, so we try to interpret that behavior. Sometimes it's our older kids that have all of these things on their agenda. So many things that keep this toxic stress level up. Sometimes it's our elementary or middle school kids trying to remember it all, do it all, please everybody, please themselves, fit in, go out. Really difficult for our kids. But our interpretation drives what we're going to do about that. Or when there are older kids, what they're going to do about that. Or are we going to do nothing because we're not quite sure what to do? Question. In what ways in Lawrence are kids in the river? What do you know or what do you hear? Let's make this personal to you guys. Ma'am. And? Is that a bad thing? Do they have lead in the water? Is that what you mean? What's the issue?
I think that there is a different level of desire to achieve in a way that seems like it's for everybody when it's not.
So maybe some of this level of expectation is far greater than the ability to achieve it for some kids sometimes. Maybe. How are our kids in the river? What are the behaviors that you think are out there or that you know are out there? What are we rescuing our kids from? Let me remind you, I am a therapist, I can wait. I am fine with silence. Ah, there we go. Sure, how about that, right?
Can you repeat what you said?
I will, I'll repeat them. So the comment was panic attacks. It's kind of like, oh my God, my kid is being attacked. Listen to the language, by fear of something. Right? And kids will tell you, or there may be some of you, I'm not asking you to acknowledge it, some of you yourselves have experienced that in which you feel you're going to die. Your heart is just beating rapidly like this, you can't catch your breath. Your stomach is all butterflied and nausea, you might even throw up because you get overwhelmed and you can't put your finger on it. Boy, that's a toxic situation for a kid or an adult. What are some other ways in which you know the kids are in the river? Vaping and marijuana use, or one and the same, or vaping marijuana, right? So this need to ingest, we don't quite understand that. We will. We don't quite understand that. Why is it necessary? Why is it important? What does it do for our kids that they need to smoke weed or they need to vape CBD oil? That puts them in the river. Alcohol use. We'll talk about that as well. So, keep this in mind, and I'll come back to you. Keep this in mind that normally, typically, if we're healthy, we regulate the stuff that goes on in our lives. We can regulate it. We have self-regulation. We know how to manage it. We can keep a lot of balls in the air. But when we are dysregulated and we feel overwhelmed, many times we reach for alcohol. We reach for marijuana. We want to vape something. We want to do something to calm this body because it's a terrible feeling. So there are reasons behind it that we could understand, isn't it? Peer pressure as a factor, right? Even if the parents are saying, hey, listen, I'm not telling my kid to go to Princeton. But they're pitching it to each other. Where you going? What's your SAT scores? What you get on how many AP classes do you take? We know that, right? The competition. Now, don't get me wrong. None of that in and of itself is terrible. It's only terrible for a kid who can't manage it. That's the issue. So keep in mind there's something called resiliency, and we'll talk about that as well in a minute. So let's not judge it as bad, have the value of bad because it is. But what about when it falls on some kids and they can't manage it? Good point. So even here in Lawrence, you have another hand somewhere? Yes, ma'am. Like from you guys? Well, not me. It'd be the other people in the room. But yeah, you have high expectations for your kids, right? You want them to do well. And sometimes it doesn't play well. It doesn't mean that the expectation is bad, that you should always lower the bar for your kids. It doesn't mean that. But what we do know is some of the way that we play it out adds to the pressures that our kids feel. Good point, isn't it? Cutting, self-injury. We're going to talk about that in a minute too, right? Something just like alcohol, just like a marijuana, something that calms your body. A lot of our kids adapt it's called a non-suicidal self-injury. It's called an NSSI. It's a way that they injure their body with an idea to calm their body. And we'll talk about that in a second. Now,
I was thinking about when stress with teens with social media, that you're having social interactions 24 hours a day, and if there's gossip, bullying, rumors, you can never really get away from that.
got it. So it used to be that it would happen in school, you'd go home and you'd get a break.
Yeah.
But now you're on, right? Unless parents say you can't be on. Now I know I'm freaking some of you out and saying, what do you mean? I can tell my kids they can't be on. You could do that. Yeah, but my kid's going to be really angry. Really upset. They won't listen to me anyway. Well, then we need to talk about that and how you lost your power and influence as a mom or a dad on your kids and grandkids. Because in fact, kids also want some structure and predictability in their lives. That they feel, well, I'm going to change the word on that. She used the word fragile. Our kids feel fragile. So what we know is that some of our kids and some of you feel vulnerable, right? That there are things that go on in life that they stay away from because of the fear of it in their lives that might overwhelm them or shut them down. I like it.
I was going to talk about fear. Fear of failure.
Yeah.
Fear of missing something on social media or anywhere. But fear.
Can we agree it's tough to be an adolescent? I know, it's tougher to be the parent of an adolescent. I get that. But it's tough to be an adolescent. It's tough to navigate this world. There's so much exposure to so much stuff. And how do we do that in a way that keeps our kids connected? Because that's important. But at the same time, we help to structure them so that they can be healthy from the inside. Great. So let's take a look at, remember, there was this young boy, I drew this line, this continuum, and I said there's a whole lot of stuff, and you've touched on a whole lot of stuff. So what we want to do now is kind of raise the issue. What are some of the things that can go wrong? And for some of you, it might be, that looks familiar. I didn't know how to talk about it. I didn't know how to name it. But oh my God, I'm worried about that with my kid. And that's part of the purpose tonight, is to raise awareness of some possibilities. So here's the first one. So how about that? We talked about that, right? Drinking and drugging, but that's not the key factor in this slide. The key factor in this slide is to numb the pain. What you're going to hear over and over and over again for the next 40, 50, 60 minutes is this issue of pain. Yeah, physical, but mostly emotional. Pain in which their story on the inside, their deep feelings, are feelings of woundedness, incompetence, inability, sadness, a mix of all of those. How did that happen? Well, we don't like pain. There's nobody, just like everybody wants their kid to be happy. None of you like pain. You will do whatever you can not to feel pain as you reach for your Advil in your purse right now. We don't like pain. Neither do kids, and they will do something to numb it if it gets to an excess that they can't control. Somebody had mentioned cutting, right? So there's cutting and burning. Let's elevate your understanding. Self-injury is an effort to calm the body, and it does that in a biological way and in an emotional way. Biologically, what it does is it releases endorphins. When you cut yourself, burn yourself, bang your head, it releases endorphins, and when the endorphins are released, it makes you feel a little bit better. Now, if you're already pretty healthy, you can't imagine taking a blade and cutting your arm or cutting your belly. You can't imagine, because you're healthy. But for kids who are on that road to not be, many times that they will, in fact, reach for a blade or a cigarette lighter. Our boys, they don't use this as often, but here's a kind of a heads up for you folks. When our boys, when they're older and they get really angry, many times parents will talk about how they punch the walls at home in anger. you'll see fist marks in the walls, in the basement, in the bedroom, in the den. That might be particularly after they get off of a video game in which they haven't done well, and they're really, really juiced and angry. That punching is to release endorphins to calm the body, much the same way that that is. In my office, the kids will also tell me I'd rather feel the physical pain than the emotional pain. There it comes again, right? It surfaces again. I'd rather feel the physical, they'd say. Some kids will say, you know, I feel so empty inside, so dead inside. When I cut myself and I see the blood, I feel at least I'm alive. Now, if you're healthy, you can't relate to that. But intellectually, we have to if we find that our girls or our boys are in fact such pain that they're trying to regulate it by doing something to their body because their body feels like they want to jump out of their skin. These kids who fail in spite of immense potential. These are kids, you know, from my years in special education, these are kids around IEPs and 504 plans and the IRS team in school in which teachers scratched their head and said, this is a smart kid, I know he or she is capable. But the performance is terrible. They can't figure it out. That's part of the value of that slide. But there's another lesson here in that slide. And I want to tell you that those words on that halo above that boy were not written by that boy. Those words were written by an adult in his life. When our kids disappoint us, we use words that we think motivate them, and actually they're destructive. You can see that it's calling them lazy or calling them worthless or bad or dumb or stupid. I had a kid in my office, he was 15, he was there with mom or dad. It was mom and dad that night, first night. We spent about a half an hour of the session time just me getting to know the family story. The family story was when this kid who's 15 was a little guy, when he was in elementary school, he was more happy-go-lucky, he was involved in things, played sports, he was fun to be around. He slept well, he ate well, he was just one of those really nice kids. And here he was as a sophomore in high school. Grades are falling apart. Parents found marijuana in his room. He's been more and more distant. In fact, sometimes he's downright disrespectful. And those mom and dads are saying, we want this kid back. We want our little guy back. So I got the family story and I said to them, would you two, mom and dad, would you guys be willing to wait in the waiting room? I'd like to spend a little bit of time with Bobby. So they were happy to get out of the therapist's office, I'll tell you that. So they leave, and now Bobby is just kind of me and him. And I said, hey, listen, Bobby, I have a question for you. Heard the story. Do you have a theory about yourself? Well, he didn't. Because most of our kids don't think about why they do what they do and how they're involved in what they are. He said, no. I said, well, there must be a reason why this little guy was so connected and healthy, and this guy is struggling. That mom and dad say you're really struggling. What do you think is going on? He sat there for a second, and tears came to his eyes, and he said, I guess I'm just lazy. I said, oh, lazy. Did you go to the dictionary looking for a definition of who you were? Did you pick that word yourself? He said, no. He said, whenever I do poorly in school, whenever I break the rule, whenever I'm in trouble, my dad just says, you know, you're just fucking lazy. Dad wrote that up there. Those words up there, that boy's going to carry him. He's like Teflon. When that happens young to our babies and somebody puts those words on them, they carry it through life. That's why they never feel good enough. Because now they have all these ideas that they can't be good enough because they're just stupid. You're a dumb shit. Oh, I'm sorry if I offend anybody, but the kids tell me this is what moms and dads tell them when they're not doing well in school. Unable to regulate. We talked about that, right? So use alcohol, use marijuana, regulate the body because we can't. Some kids don't do it when they're little guys and some don't do it when they're big guys. And hypothetically, this is kind of, we talked about this. This is one of those, see that young lady right there? You know why she's so upset? Because on her advanced organic chemistry exam, she got an A- instead of an A. Now we know that that happens. We know that our kids are so tense on perfection or competition that when there's a blip, they're unable to regulate that. How'd that happen? Not everybody. Why that young girl? How about our kids that isolate, avoid, and they shut down? These are the kids, they come home from school, go to the room, close the door. They don't come to dinner anymore. You can't talk to them. They won't even answer you through the door. They're just in their own world, isolated, shut down. Now, here's a fact. The fact is, we know human beings from infancy on, we're going to talk about babies in a minute, need to be attached. The more attached you are to healthy relationships, the healthier you are. If you are unattached, you begin to spiral and unravel and fall apart. That's where the isolation, if we see it and understand what we see, that's a red flag that says, what's going on with my kid? Why is he or she shut down and isolated? How about these kids? One of the researchers that I found after I came back from that district with that suicide death was Sandra Bloom. And Sandra Bloom's work, she said this: hurt people hurt people. Wow. Healthy people don't hurt people. Healthy people don't insult people. And here's maybe where I can elevate your thinking beyond your kids to yourself. Your partner. Some other adult in that child's life. Where in fact, there's lots of harm and hurt going on, and we sometimes blow it off as that's just how she is, that's just how she is, it's kind of how we do things. But I'm here to tell you that this behavior in the life of a kid, whether they're little or growing up, causes some damage that gets in the way of them being healthy, and therefore they're not going to reach happy. And we can do something about that. Some kids who want and try to end their lives, it just gets so bad. This young boy at 13 who can't do tomorrow, just contemplating, I can't do this anymore. There's nothing works. My life sucks. It'll always suck. Things never go my way. How would we know that? And then we know that kids as young as 10 take their own lives. That we know that in Mercer County over the past 6 months, we've lost 5 kids to suicide. It's not an epidemic. Everybody's not trying to kill themselves or thinking about dying, but enough that we need to pay attention to that, because ultimately, when we get to the very end and we don't seem to have any other options, no other cards to play, sometimes we think about dying. I was asked today by the folks, there's a group in Mercer County called the Common Ground Consortium. Common Ground is an organization of independent schools. Well, they are having a presentation. That would be me, so I'm not suggesting you need to come and deal with me twice a week. On next Tuesday the 15th at the Pennington School, but the focus is going to be on suicidal behavior. So you can go on the internet and you can find Common Ground and you can see the details. It's a non-fee, non-register, you just walk in. But they want to make sure that they open it up to the greater community, because sometimes our kids as young as 10 years old think about or take their own lives. All of those things, every one of those is a red flag. They are there for you to keep in your mind as a filter through which you see your own children, or friends of your children, which is also very important. See, in addition to that videotape that's going to be on the website for you guys, all of these slides will be on the website too, so you can go back and you can pull the information if you need to, because something may resonate with you where you say, it's hard for me to admit this, but I'm worried about my kid for that reason. Well, it begs the question, all right, let's go back to that toxic stress thing, George. Like, where the heck's it come from? How do we get toxic stress in our bodies? And why can't we get rid of it? And what does it do to us? Well, it actually is caught up in a story with a bear. Now, this story comes out of a book called The Deepest Well by a pediatrician, Nadine Burke-Harris. I want to give her credit. I think her book is up on the screen at the end of the presentation. So she tells a story about a bear, not that bear. She tells a story about that bear. And the story about that bear looks like this. Imagine for yourself, not the person next to you, but you, that on a nice spring day like today, you decide that you're going to get off into a wooded area and go for a walk, all by yourself. Beautiful day, just you and nature. Now, I'm going to suggest, I know this is a fantasy. You know why it's a fantasy? Because I'm going to suggest you don't have your cell phone with you. How about that? Because you have a cell phone everywhere. And I'm saying, no, leave it home. Just be you and you. Go enjoy the sun, the air, and nature. Well, while you're doing that, at the end of a trail, you see this guy. And every single one of you, regardless of who you are, where you live, where you were born, how old you are, none of the variables matter because every single one of you, your body will respond in a same fashion when you see that bear. Your body stops and right away your heart rate is up. Your blood pressure is up. Because you need to pump blood into the big muscles of your legs because you may need to run away from that guy. Or in your chest and your arms because you may need to fight, especially if your kids are with you, you want to protect your kids. Respiration is up, you need more oxygen in your body. It's funny about our pupils. You know, our pupils dilate so that we can keep an eye on the danger, and then our head starts to scan looking for exits. Every one of your bodies and mine does exactly that within parts of a minute, probably within 10, 15 seconds. That's called a survival skill. If it wasn't for that skill deep in the reptilian part of your brain, if you had a problem solved, I think that's a bear. I'm not sure, and I don't know what kind of bear it is, but I've seen National Geographic. In fact, I read that article. By the time you problem solve that, you're lunch for Mr. and Mrs. Bear. It's a good thing we have this response system. Now, as that bear continues to go, your stress response system recalibrates itself. It calms itself. Heart rate is down, blood pressure is down. Now, if you notice, your hand probably has a little bit of a shake to it. We get that way when we're highly stressed. That's called a cortisol flow. Cortisol is a stress response hormone that makes you stronger and faster. And if we don't use it up, we still get this until it burns up. All within parts of seconds. That's if you come across a bear in the woods. But the question then begs itself, well, what if the bear is in the child's home? What if that's the case? Then what we know when we take a look at that picture, we can see that that's a little girl, and she's not smart enough, doesn't have enough life experiences to keep herself safe, but she's got these instincts that says, I need to survive. So what she does when the bear roars at her, she goes and hides and finds a wall to put her back up against, because that way the danger doesn't come from behind her, and she makes herself as small as she possibly can, and she closes her eyes, she doesn't want to see the danger, she covers her ears, she doesn't want to hear the danger, maybe the danger won't find me. But what we know is, for many of our kids, the bear does find them. And for a kid like that, in a house like that, that system never turns off. That stress response system is always on. It's on for her. It's on for this guy here. Same thing, you can see that he found his way. But the bear's got him. You can see even when they're older, when our kids are older, and we puff up because we're angry, because their grades dropped, because they didn't do their homework, they didn't do their chores. Oh, by the way, I probably recognize the fact that they don't have chores, because most of our kids today don't have chores. And as a result of that, the resiliency level is compromised in our children. Remember, we talked about that earlier, that it's not so much all the bad stuff that happens, it's whether or not you can weather it and survive it. Kids with high levels of resiliency, they can do it. Kids who have little self-serving resiliency, they have trouble with that. Like that guy and that young girl. And sometimes it's two bears in the same house. So I wonder whether or not your children would see you as the bear. Because regardless of who they are, regardless of where you are, regardless of where you live in town, the body stress response system is exactly the same. And what we know is that that's been the response to that little kid. We'll talk about birth, then what we know is they have a different brain because of the presence of cortisol in their system all the time. Now maybe the bear lives in the classroom. And Allison said that we've been here talking to teachers, right? Because sometimes whether you're a teacher or whether you're front office staff or whether you're support staff or whether you're administrative staff, if you're the adult in the life of a kid, sometimes you represent a bear and a threat, and therefore that kid's system is always on and they're not performing. They're surviving. They're trying to figure out how to get away from you. Now for some kids, toxic stress begins really young. That some kids within the nest that they are born into, they are exposed at a very young age to a lot of toxic environment. In fact, for some kids, it affects them even younger. If you take any one of those moms, and hypothetically, if we identify her as a mom who lives in a toxic environment, let's call it domestic violence, and that mom is just trying to survive, or for some other reason she's under stress all the time, then her stress response system is always on, and when she's pumping cortisone adrenaline, that baby's feeling cortisone adrenaline. See, we knew this, right? We knew this 30 years ago when we did it around alcohol. We knew that if a pregnant mom drank alcohol, it elevated the risk of fetal alcohol syndrome, because the fetus shares the blood supply. Same thing with toxic stressors. Now, when these babies are born, we used to call them, in my growing up, we used to call them colicky babies. Right? These are babies that it's really difficult to soothe them. They seem to be just, they want to jump out of their skin. These are babies that don't sleep well, they don't go to bed easily. Even when you hold them and try to soothe them, you know, a new mom kind of cradles that baby against her chest to soothe that baby. These babies don't soothe easily at all. And when that happens, new moms, particularly first-time new moms, begin to wonder whether it's them, because they can't see the bond with this baby. Very early on, things can go wrong because of toxic stress. So what are these things? These are the things that probably don't exist in Lawrence Township, but everywhere else I go, they exist to some degree. These are the things that get in the way of raising healthy kids. These are the things that chip away at resiliency and self-confidence and ability to problem solve, to connect, to attach. These are the things that happen. I just want to point out one because it seems so simple, but it's so significant. This one here, harsh and demeaning language. Remember that boy with the halo of words? Harsh and demeaning language. When adults use harsh and demeaning language toward their children, about their children, it's destructive. We even have to temper some teachers and some school folks about the use of sarcasm, for instance, because for some kids, sarcasm is so destructive and so hurtful. Remember, in the absence of understanding, sometimes there's suffering, and sometimes there is death. Questions? Paralyzed you, didn't I? Yes, ma'am?
I have a question about negative language.
Yes.
I don't know how...
She's talking hypothetically now, so don't be judgmental.
I am definitely guilty of calling my children lazy.
Okay?
He doesn't remember, doesn't bother, doesn't do his laundry, doesn't clean his room, and I label that lazy, but I think he's lazy. I don't know how to not address his shortcomings in a positive way.
Does he know you're talking about him tonight in front of this crowd? Don't look at the camera. So let me unpackage your comment. Let me ask you a question. By calling him lazy, did that improve his productivity? Doesn't, right? Doesn't matter. You can label it all you want. It's not going to change the behavior. So let him off the hook? It's not about letting him off the hook. It is about finding ways to get at the lack of motivation, which is a much better way of describing that than lazy. Right? Because lazy can be adopted then as a character trait. Lack of motivation is about what you do or what you don't do and why you do or what you don't do. So for some of our kids, so for some of our children, you may find that they're not motivated where we want them to be motivated. They're really motivated, for instance, to play video games. Hours, just upon hours. I have a theory about that. Our kids like to be competent. Don't we all? When we're competent and somebody acknowledges our competency, don't we feel good? Our children want to be competent, and they work really hard at video games to do that. And you might not know the language, but they'll talk to friends about the level that they're achieving as they get better and better. Our job, our work is, how do we help them become competent in this world as well? So we want to be able to take some of the time away from that, put some of the time over here, and how do we change our language? And how do we bring them into it's not a secret of what you're trying to do, it's how do you bring them into the solution to the problem of how that's working. Now, just standing here, like, I sound like a genius, don't I? And she's going to go home and try everything I said, and this kid's still not going to be motivated. So she'll email me next week and say, it doesn't work. Genius. Do you have any other ideas? So the work actually is building that relationship with him so that you're not frequently demeaning, you're not frequently judgmental in a negative way. You don't show there's a phrase that's going to come up later, it's called a yuck face. You don't use your yuck face with him a lot because that's a disparaging, I don't approve of you look. So it's a great question. It's shared by most of these folks here in terms of motivation. And what we find is if we can get the kids to think about it first and then to talk about it, why do you think it is that you just want to spend so much time there and not any time over here? First thing they're going to come up with, that's fun, this isn't. Now, I'm going to assume adolescent. One of the things that's really difficult to do, if you've never expected your kids to have any responsibilities at home at all, that is really hard to impose that when they're 14 and 15 and 16. That if you weren't building this resiliency of a contribution to family, that's my phrase, when they were 2 or 3, taking their dish to the sink, putting their clothes in the hamper, because if they do more of that, it frees up you doing that, and maybe then they'll have more of your time to do that. But what it shows is their effort to be a part of family. That's a pretty simple thing. You know, we talked earlier about eating dinner together. Pretty simple thing. Research has said kids who sit at the dinner table at least once a week with family and have conversations, those kids have less risky behavior than kids who eat over there or don't come at all. You're going to challenge me?
No, I'm going to
Thank God.
support you. I don't know if you knew the author Julie Lucott.
Yes, she was just at Robbinsville High School.
Yeah, and so she talks about love and chores.
Yep.
But then she talks about that last piece that you talked about, and she challenged the audience that night of saying, put down your cell phones, you as the parent and your child, and force them to an extent, to have a different conversation where the conversation isn't about, did you do your homework? How did you do on the test? It's, what's important to you? How's it going? What are you interested in?
Is there anything you would like me to do differently as a parent?
Exactly.
Right?
And instead of asking, did you do, and changing that conversation.
Yeah, because mostly I think we get to a point of parenting where we're mostly checking in to catch them that they didn't do something. Right? Because we're not trusting them that they did. And kids will say, my mom and dad don't trust me at all. And if that is not reconstructed, it's very difficult for kids to feel part of the family. They feel apart from the family. In fact, her book jacket is one of the slides at the end of the PowerPoint, How to Raise an Adult.
Yeah, it's a great book.
How to Raise an Adult. We good so far? Yes?
Now, what can we do, and because there's some educators here and some other adults, what can we do to help students or children that are in this quandary? In this kind of like downward spiral?
Well, number one, they don't know they're in a quandary. Right? They don't have perspective on that, right? So that's kind of really an important thing to do. And it really begins with conversation. It begins with the intimacy of conversation that doesn't put them on the spot, but engages them in real stuff. So I'll talk about some of the things that we can do, regardless of whether or not what your role is, a foster parent, a step parent, a biological parent, an educator, an administrator. because it's all of the same stuff, regardless of what your role is. So we'll talk about what that is, I promise you, before the next 15, 20 minutes. So part of what I found when I was doing my research is something called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, right? It's ACEs. And this was back in the 90s, and the two researchers were wondering whether or not environment, toxic environment, we're talking about toxic stress, whether or not toxic environment is a contribution to obesity. If a kid or an adult lives in a toxic environment, will they pack on more weight? And they did research. They interviewed 17,000 people in a hospital system out west, and they came up with a series of questions, and they found the answer to their theory was yes. Toxicity is a contribution to obesity, but they found a whole lot of other stuff, and you're going to find out that stuff now about you. So here's what I'd like you to do. There's going to be 10 questions here. They're yes-nos. They're about you from your birth to age 18. Folks like me, it's really difficult to think back that far. I do my best, but think about your growing up experiences, birth to 18. Let's see how many of these are yes. If they apply to you, you get a 1. If they don't apply to you, you get no score. Here's the first one. Did a parent or other adult in the household often and very often swear at you, perhaps insult you, put you down, humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt, threatened you, humiliated you? Did you grow up in a household, in a nest, where there was chronic humiliation as a way to parent, as a way to control your behavior? If that was your experience, you get a 1. Number 2. Did a parent or other adult, often, perhaps very often, push you, grab you, slap you, throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? You went from verbal to physical. And remember, this is a private assessment. In your own head, you're keeping score. You don't need to share with anybody. Number 3. Did an adult or a person at least 5 years older than you ever touch you, fondle you, have you touch their body in a sexual way, or attempt to actually have oral, anal, or intercourse with? Now your score is either 0, or 1, or 2, or 3. Number 4. Did you often or very often feel that nobody in your family loved you, or thought you were important, or thought you were special? I'm going to put a pause on that. Perhaps that was your experience. I wonder who those kids are who grew up as not only just innocent, but unaware, who never felt important. They never felt they belonged. They never felt special. Or your family didn't look out for each other, they didn't feel close to each other, they didn't even support each other. I get young adults and adults in my practice that will say, I thought I raised myself. That's how that gets interpreted out. Number 5. Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat? Perhaps you had to wear dirty clothes, you had no one to protect you. Or here's a big one, you lived in a nest where your parents or the adults there were too drunk or too high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it. That's first 5 are things that you may have experienced directly. The second 5 are things that you bear witness to. Things that weren't directed at you, but you were in the midst and saw it happening. Because what we know is when you bear witness to these kinds of adverse experiences, they affect you and they affect you here, really for a pretty long time. Here's number 6. Were your parents ever separated or divorced? Believe it or not, although it's common, we kind of blow it off nowadays, right? As what's the big deal? It's a big deal. Don't get me wrong. Some families need to come apart because the mom or the dad is treacherous, causes a lot of harm. I get that. As a family therapist, I work with that. But I'm talking in general. How are the kids affected by mom and dad separated? Number 7. Was your mom, your stepmom, maybe you were raised by grandma, were you bearing witness to the fact that she was pushed, grabbed, slapped, things thrown at her, kicked, bitten, hit with a fist? Did you watch the abuse to the maternal figure in your home? You would get a 1 for that. Number 8. Did you live with anybody who was a problem drinker, not a drinker, a problem drinker, somebody who you would say was an alcoholic, or they used street drugs? That would be a 1. Number 9. Was a household member depressed? Was there mental illness in the family? Did a household member attempt suicide? Did somebody in the family die by suicide? Your birth to 18. And number 10. Did a household member go to prison. They were the initial 10 questions. Yeses or nos. Now what they found is that 60% of the people in that group, 60% had at least a 1. But it really started to get crazy in the human behavior, both emotionally and physically, at 4. 4 is the tipping point. So let me show you what that looks like. These are the things that happen in our children if they live in an environment and have a score of 4 or more. What you can see is they're unable to hold it together. You know, their prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of their brain, frequently is offline. Because as our stressors mount up, we can't think clearly. Let me give you an example. I see some doubt on your faces. I don't want you to leave doubting. If we were to take any one of you and slide you into a brain imaging machine, put earbuds in you, and then the technician were to talk nicely to you, ask you questions about your family, where you're from, kind of typical things, this part of your brain will light up inside the imaging machine. At a signal, the technician begins to criticize you. You did this wrong, you did that wrong, what about this, how did this happen? And all of a sudden this goes dark because you're no longer able to problem solve or stay engaged. Your kids are no longer able to use their executive functioning well. They can't access memory very easily. They'll study for that test and they think you have it. But the next day when their anxiety's up, they can't access it. And what it means is that they also become pretty non-compliant. They get so frustrated with themselves, they'll become frustrated with you. All because of the way their ACEs score has affected their neurology. In their lifetime, here's some results, both physical and emotional. A kid with a 4 or more is twice as likely to develop cancer as a kid with a 0. Let's go back to the bear story. 4 or more means your system is on. If your system never shuts down, then your body marinates in cortisol and adrenaline all the time. The bear is in the house all the time. The body can't take that, and therefore cancers develop. Twice as likely than somebody who has a score of 0. Increase in pulmonary illnesses, your asthmatic kids many times. Immune system illnesses, we get more colds, we get more flus, because the immune system is shut down, it's inflamed at this low level, all because of experiences that have been held in the body and the mind since infancy. They're 46 times more likely to develop depression than a kid with a score of 0. Now you'll have to go back and think of what those 10 things were. Like, oh my God, what were those 10 things? And here's what's interesting. It doesn't matter what the combination of them is. It doesn't matter whether it was number 1, number 3, number 5, number 7. That doesn't matter. What matters is there were 4 of them. Because those have equal sabotaging effect on the human brain and body. Just about equally so. And the kid's risk of suicide goes up 1,200%. Unable to regulate. Now, let me take you back to where I was in Southern Monmouth and this 13-year-old boy. That data is what said to me, is there something I can do with moms and dads, both in my practice and in audiences like this, somewhere that I can help kids and teachers to lower the impact of ACEs in school so that we can walk away from these negative outcomes. There are other ACEs that have come along since the late 90s. These big events in a kid's life also have a deleterious effect. If you could swap them in and out for some kids, we're still using the 4, the 5, the 6, the 7. Big events in the child's life. A little bit of a scare factor. This is the science. The science says if you have a score of 6 or higher, you're likely to live 20 fewer years than if you have a score of 0. Because your body just is under this weight of these things that have happened. The bear being in your environment that keeps your system on all the time. That the architecture of your brain is different. That our kids will struggle more in school. They struggle more in relationships. You struggle more in relationships. the effects these things have on the brains and bodies of our babies and ourselves. These are common stress responses. Now, I'll give you a downside of living in our culture. Here's a downside. There's so many upsides. Here's a downside. This kid gets referred home by the nurse or the counselor or by the teacher. These are the behaviors that are described. This concerned mom takes their kid to the pediatrician. The pediatrician says, yep, your kid has ADHD, because that's what it looks like in the DSM-5. That's not so bad. To label it, that's not so bad. But then what's the next step? You put a kid on medication because of that. Now, there are 3 places in the human body where you hold your stressors. Let's check it out with you. So number 1 is headache people, because you carry it here in your neck and in your shoulders. Number 2 is gut people. These are people with belly aches, diarrhea, constipation. Oh, I know you're out there, because I watch TV. I know that there are more commercials for Linzess and Pepto-Bismol and Tums than there have ever been. And those companies would not be promoting those medications if we didn't have gut issues. Now, if there are nurses in the room, or if you talk to your kid's school nurse, it's happened to me all the time in all the districts I've been in, I would say to the nurse, say, hey, listen, I could overhear a conversation and say, yeah, Georgie's not coming to school today. What's that about? Well, mom called and he's got these belly problems. And she took him to the specialist and they did all these examinations and they couldn't find anything wrong. Now what I know is they're looking in the wrong place. It's the way the environment swirls around some kids that they internalize the gut stuff. Oh, what's the 3rd place, George? Head and neck, gut. And then when you're about 40, right here, pulmonary and heart disease. If you have a score of 4 or more, you have a 200% greater likelihood of heart disease than if you had a score of 0. So what I'm saying to you is, we can control the variables. We know what those 10 things are. We know what the other ACEs are. Some of them are out of our control, like death of a sibling, death of a parent. Here's the secret. Sandra Bloom again. Bloom said in her research, it's not the events that cause the damage. It's not the traumatic event that does the harm. It's the absence of a caring adult to be in the life of the child to help them through it. If that child feels like they're going through it alone, there's the damage. If they feel mom or dad's got their back, somebody else has got their back, because it doesn't have to be mom or dad. It could be a coach, could be a counselor, could be a pastor of a church, could be a grandparent, somebody who stands by that kid. That will help that kid survive those terrible things. But when kids feel that they're all alone in it, that nobody really cares, that nobody's got their back. So what we do for education is we talk about creating sanctuary classrooms, places where everybody belongs. Places where it doesn't matter what your performance is, there's still going to be a significant adult in that room who's never there. He or she is only the one that welcomes you every day and is so glad you're there. That's where you find sanctuary. That's where healing happens. So, I'm going to go back to the question. That's one of the things that can be done. One of the things that can be done is to create opportunities for sanctuary. Do an assessment of your nest. Decide what goes on in your nest and whether or not it's deleterious, whether it's destructive and hurtful, or it's not. If you're in that nest as the only adult, then you have absolute control over the environment of that nest. But if you share the adult role with somebody else, and you say, man, it's not me, it's my partner, my husband, my wife, my partner, then what can we do about that? We can have a conversation about that with them, because we know if it continues, the outcomes are going to be the same. So there are things that we can do by staying connected, minimizing our bareness in the face of our kids, being more fair in the way that we talk to them about both our disappointments and our expectations, how they feel they're in it with us. Are they a part of the family or apart from the family? Are you able to set fair and clear boundaries around things like video games? Are you able to reintroduce the idea of chores as a contribution to the family? There are the things that we can manipulate as adults in order to make the environment healthier. And when we do, and when we're persistent and consistent on that, our kids' brains respond accordingly, and they do heal. Attachment. We talked about that both with babies and as adults. Let me give you an adult example. We'll finish up. I won't get to all the slides, but you'll have them because you can pull them down. Let me tell you the story about attachment that I think is critical for you. Think back to a young love. Maybe not your first love, maybe that was a mistake. But somebody that you can remember falling in love with. And in this hypothetical falling in love with this person, you go to lunch. And when you're at lunch, it's a dreamy opportunity. You stare at each other's faces and you smile. There's no yuck face here. Nobody's got a frown. Nobody's disagreeing. Nobody's calling each other out. You're not doing that. Somebody reaches their hand across the table, you put your hand on their hand. Attachment. Because it's a way that human beings say that they're together, connected. And we have to have attachment in order to be healthy. That's why the absence of hugs on our kids is not a good thing for kids. Hugs are really a good way of keeping kids attached. This young couple at lunch, then they're all finished, and when they get up and they leave that restaurant, they're holding hands. Because that's what they're doing. And they get to the curb, and he goes that way and she goes that way, but before they leave each other, they hug each other. Because attachment is how we stay connected. In that book about the bear, Nadine Burkhardt says this: there are 4 prerequisites to healthiness in adults and kids. 4. In this order. Here they are. Check yourself out. Number 1, sleep. If you don't get your 8 hours, your body and your brain are going to be screwed up. And what we know is for many of our kids, they're not getting their 8 hours. If your kid's got his phone or her phone in the room or the iPad, you know it's disrupted sleep. Get the phone, get the iPad out. Now, you can either surreptitiously go and raid their room and take it. That's not a good way of doing it. Give them advance notice. Hey, listen, I want to try an experiment here because what I'm believing is you've got disrupted sleep. You're really irritable. I don't like the way that you've been kind of talking to me. I know, you don't like the way I've been talking to you either. I'm going to improve my sleep too. Sleep, nutrition, exercise, get rid of the toxins. Here's the 4th one. Healthy relationships, not relationships. Xbox relationships don't count. Healthy relationships. Those 4 things are prerequisites to us doing well, both as adults and parenting and keeping our space with our kids, being able to stay connected to our kids, but it's also a prerequisite for our kids regardless of how old they are. If any of those are out of sorts in your home, the thinking then is, how do I get them back in line? Why would I live with 4 things that are out of sorts when I know that by bringing them in line, my kids can be healthier? Attachment. Safety. Are you the bear? Is your spouse the bear? Irritable? I wonder if you've got a bear in your house, I wonder what the bear's ACEs score is. Because what you know is that it didn't start with you. That if you've got a high ACEs score, you are probably parented by people with high ACEs scores. It's intergenerational. We adopt behaviors, but now we know that certain behaviors are bad for our kids. So how can we take a look at that more objectively with great love for our spouse and our kids and make some changes? And then soothing and calming adult behavior. Remember laying that baby down, we can't be soothed? How do we soothe our children? Is there quiet time? You know what some families are doing? They're adopting a once-a-week board games instead of electronics. No electronics on Thursday. From 7 to 8, we're going to do a board game. Ah, that's stupid. I don't want to do that. That's boring. Yep, Thursday, 7 to 8, board game, be at the table. Because it's a soothing way of connecting. See, doing the board game is like having dinner together at the same table. It reconnects the family. It makes you real to your kids. They can hear about your day. Keep your gripes to a minimum. They can hear about how you've made it through the day. All right, I'm going to do this as a final, then I'll ask the final question. So number 1, so what are the answers? Number one answer is manage your own stuff. Don't be managing other people's crap when you got plenty of your own. Get your own stuff, realize what it is, what's your own ACEs score, what am I going to do about that? Because when you get that aligned, boy, are you so much more effective as a mom or a dad. You're less reactive. Number 2, understand that challenges are different than stressors. Challenges are how kids learn to persevere and persist. And in the absence of responsibilities, they don't ever practice that. I read a saying the other day that didn't make it into a slide. I'm going to tell you what it is. It says this: prepare the child for the path. Don't prepare the path for the child. Don't go be taking all the rocks out of the road for the kid. If you took all the rocks out of the stream, there would not be a bubbling brook. If you're going to remove every obstacle from your child's life, if you're going to assure yourself that they're never disappointed, they're never discouraged, they never get it wrong, then what you will do is you will be going off to college with them to help them get through. So you might as well plan for an extra tuition, at least room and board. Do not prepare the path for the child. Prepare the child for the path. This is the face line. Watch your yuck face. When you lose your temper, apologize. If you screw up, say, hey, listen, come back here. On me. I am really sorry. I shouldn't have done my stuff on you. It's on me. There are 3 pieces to an apology. Number 1, apologize specifically for what you believe you did wrong. Number 2, own it. It's on me. Number 3, is there anything I can do to make sure we are okay? I don't want you to be hurt by what I did. This is not an apology. Hey, listen, Bobby, I'm really sorry for what I said to you last night before you went to bed. But I got to tell you, Bobby, if you were doing what you should have done and had all your homework done, I probably wouldn't have been irritable. You made your behavior Bobby's fault, wasn't it? Your behavior should be. Validate emotions. They're entitled to be sad. They're entitled to be angry. They're entitled to that. They're not entitled to all the behavior that comes with it. You can be angry, but you can't punch the wall. You can be angry, but you can't shove me. I don't condone the behavior, but I honor the fact that you are. Let's figure out other ways that you can manage your anger, your sadness, your hurt. Strengthen attachments, big one. And if you've got multiple kids in your family, the bonds across the kids is also as equally as important. Good feelings always. You don't get a trophy just by showing up. Don't buy them a trophy just because they signed up for the team. But what it means is, hey listen, I was really proud of you the other day. I watched you help your sister onto the bus. I really appreciate you doing that for her. Catch it. Acknowledge it. Oh, let me tell you, if he slammed the door in her face, you'd be all over him for a week. So if he does something good, you should at least acknowledge what you saw. He'll remember that too. Make it always safe and an open conversation. Sometimes kids won't talk to you because you're going to use what they say against them. I'm going to be honest with my mom and my dad. I'll tell them exactly what happened, then I'm in trouble. You don't have to like the answer, but you can respect the answer, and then you work with the answer. Consider how to use mindfulness in common moments. It's a big deal with school. School's using a lot of breathing to calm the body before tests, before a stressful day. Learning how to regulate this so they don't have to smoke weed or so they don't have to use alcohol. There are natural ways for us to do that. Here's your support team. These are the folks that you need to talk to in school. And I love what I'm hearing that's going on here in Lawrence. I'm just loving it. I've been now, this is my 4th visit. And every time I come, I hear a little bit more about what's going on, the thoughtfulness that's going on in order to pull those kids in. These are the folks. That's your team. That's the wrong button, George. Remember, if you want an outcome that's different, you're going to have to change something. You can't change them, change you. Change yourself. Here's the second one. Here are the resources. That's the How to Raise an Adult, right? Good book. Everything we've been talking about tonight, this over-parenting. Best book ever, in my opinion, Childhood Disrupted. It will help you to understand outcomes and what you can do for healing the emotional, physical needs for your kids. How your biography, what you grew up with, becomes your biology, and how you can heal for you and for your kids. The Collapse of Parenting, Leonard Sachs, kind of a local guy over in Pennsylvania, how we hurt our kids when we treat them like grown-ups. They're kids. They're not grown-ups. They're not partners. They should be your partner. And this one, maybe Burke Harris's book, The Deepest Well, that has the bear story in it, and other ways that we can help ourselves. So, it's beginning. It's a little bit of time that we have together. Prepare the child for the path. Do not prepare the path for the child. I'll take final comments and questions. Ma'am.
I'm concerned. What I'm seeing, and I'm seeing what I'm seeing in schools is kids are feeling, here's one example. I'm seeing a lot more kids come to school with, say, 103 fever, and they got their younger siblings ready for school,
Yep.
fed them,
Yep.
got themselves ready on the bus, and made it to my office.
Yep.
And I'm seeing a lot more of that, and I'm seeing those kids say, oh no, we can't call my parents at work. Even though mom and dad are attorneys, they have great jobs, the kids are feeling cruise and coming to the thing.
And for some families, that's true.
Yeah, and the kids are feeling that.
What can you do? What can we do about that? Ideas? It's not unusual. I mean, it's not usual either. It's not every kid. But certainly some families are trying to do whatever they're doing. So in that family, it sounds like a very professional family. Mom and dad have a career. But there are also going to be some families in which they're under a great deal of stress because they have to work. They can't get the kids off on the bus. Kids have to be responsible for young sibs. It's the way they're trying to survive. Right? I have great respect and great heart for that as well. So off the top of my head, my answer is, I understand the issue of don't call my mom and dad, but that gives us an opportunity to understand this kid's view of mom or dad. Right? So none of this change is easy. You can't pass these slides out and people are going to change because of it. But it is a process of staying connected to them and saying, look, I know you're really busy. If I had total control here, I'd send your kid home. Is there somebody that can come pick him up? Because he does have 103. Now, he didn't want me to disrupt you at work. He was being really considerate about that. So that takes the heat off the kid. But I'm making the decision. I want you to be aware of that. So there are things that we can do. If your ACE score is low, you don't have to acknowledge that. But if your ACE score is low, you can pull that off with them. If you have a high ACE score, now pick your kid up. Can't believe you sent your kid to school with a fever. Oh, you got a high ACE score, Mr. Grouchy. Because that is what happens. People come irritable, right? Yeah, that is true. There are circumstances in the family. We try to influence those families. I don't know, maybe those mom and dad are in the audience tonight. Yeah, probably not. They're at the office. But they'll watch the video. We'll get there, right? We will get there, a kid at a time. There's another hand. They usually don't go hand in hand. Yeah, she wanted to know if you have really strong attachment, but a high ACE score, what are the outcomes? Now, maybe I was too quick to respond. Usually when you have strong attachment, you feel pretty grounded, you feel pretty healthy, growing up with strong attachment. So therefore, usually you can be influential in the nest and pass that on. You respect attachment, you create attachment. But if the ACE scores are high, the outcomes are generally going to be what you read. You can offset it by nutrition, exercise, healthy relationships. That's an offset for high ACE score. If you do those 4 things, it doesn't matter if you have a 6, 7, or 8. You mitigate the effects of them because you control the cortisol. And therefore, your brain is clearer, you're better able to perform. So regardless of the ACE score, there are things that we can do for the human body that keep us more plugged in. Yep. 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 Oh, there's a ton of stuff. Now, the physical stuff, you already may see some of the physical illnesses play out. But if you read Nadine Burke Harris's book, and the other book, Donna Jackson Nakasawa's book, she will tell you that she was able to, by changing the way that she kind of lived her life and how she took care of herself, she was able to reverse the effects of some of the other neurological diseases that she had. Things like acupuncture, for instance, right? Things like good exercise program, things like yoga, things like mindfulness and meditation. Really powerful stuff. So there's lots that we can do, and the resources will support that 100%. Yeah.
It seems like with a lot of the 11, 12-year-olds, a lot of the when you start, and these kids are taught to go tell somebody, but now they don't know how to handle themselves. So it seems like you were talking earlier, like how they have that security, they tell the teacher, they tell the parent, and now they don't handle it. Now these kids aren't knowing how to handle it. So now they're just totally strict, and then they have to go to school the next day, and they've been chatting about online, and you know, it's just, the chatter just keeps going, they don't get a timeout because it's 24 hours on, you know, on the cell phone at home.
My evening was going fine until you mentioned that scenario.
So they come into school the next
It's a real deal.
They just have a cell phone.
It's a real deal.
They don't know how to interact, they don't know how to.
Well, here's what I'm feeling and what I'm hearing about Lawrence schools, right? What I'm hearing is there's awareness of that in an effort. Yes, we have to investigate because the law says we have to investigate, right? But there's also an effort for reconciliation. It's called restorative practices. How do you get the relationship to be better? So we don't want to tell kids, don't go to an adult. That's, you know, we don't want to extinguish help seeking. That can be really powerful when they're adolescents, but we do want them involved in the resolution of what could you have done differently. And part of the resolution for those kids who are identified as the perpetrator or the bully, there really is a part of the law that says, how do you, not just how do you punish this kid, how do you help this kid minimize those kinds of behaviors and improve relationships with others? Bullying behavior means hurt people hurt people. There's a reason for that behavior. That's why just judgment about it is insufficient. So there should be an understanding with the counselor, with the administration, with teachers of how to do that. Keeping the, yes, reach out to an adult, but at the same time, how could you have done that differently? How can we restore the relationship? Let's try it again. Should be. Home as well. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Yeah, you know, it's a great question. If there was an in utero, a lot of stressors, if the brain was changed, if there was a lot of stress early childhood, here's the nice thing about all this. It's not a doom and gloom. It says, be careful because this could happen. But what we know is when you change the environment and support the kids differently, the brain responds accordingly and rewires. It prunes out some of the bad stuff and it rewires for some of the good stuff. Absolute redemption in the brain. Absolutely. It's never too late. Even if your kid is 15, 18, 22, 25, never, ever, ever, ever too late. Ever. Did I say ever? Ever. There's never any hope. In my book, there's never any hopelessness with improvement and change and kind of restoring relationships. Ever. Oh, we can.
You brought up the teen suicide earlier on.
Yes.
So when your kid has it, they say, I just want to kill myself, I hate my life.
Yes.
How do you know that it's just something to get you as a parent mad? Or do they really know? I guess it's the balance of what's a threat to just get you riled up because they know it'll get you going versus...
Number one, we don't know. And even if it's said 10 times, every time we take it seriously. But after a while, through the assessments of the school, you can find out what their real level of risk is. But even if there's not a high level of risk, how can we reteach them other ways to get your attention other than say, I'm going to kill myself? Are there other ways to give them the words and the language? But always pay attention. And if your gut tells you you're worried, follow your gut. Call, ask. Don't be in there alone. Get a partner in that with school. Yes, ma'am.
Is there some kind of commonality between these suicide? You know, do they say to their parents, I want to kill myself?
Not always. Not always.
So it's not kind of uncultural release?
No, there's not a good hard fast rule except that we know this, is that we are hardwired to live as human beings. Something happens repeatedly throughout their lifespan or their early lives to sabotage that. We begin to see signs of it. Sometimes it's in their school grades, sometimes it's in isolation, some of the things that we talked about. Sometimes you see it in self-injury. All these red flags that say pay attention. Sometimes it does, the hurt doesn't leak out. That's a kind of a word that we use that says, they may say something to a friend, which is why we want kids to understand that if they're worried about a friend, they take the friend to the counselor. Sometimes it's a comment or something that's written. So if we pay attention to it, or if we say, hey, I'm worried because this is what I heard, this is what I feel, that at least opens the conversation up and it lowers the risk. Saying nothing, ignoring it, being afraid of it, being silent about it raises risk. So you can't plant the idea of dying in a kid's head or in an adult's head. Now here are the three areas. 10 to 24 is one age group, according to the CDC. The next group is about 45 to 60. The next group is your 75 to 90. They're your peaks of suicide deaths. Typically they're white males. In those age groups. In New Jersey, things are, they're not good because we lose kids to suicide, but of the 50 states, we're number 49 in risk, and 49 in the number of people who die out of 50. It's really good, but every year we lose about 80, 82 kids, 10 to 24 to suicide death. So there's a whole lot we still need to do. That's why we elevate the understanding of staff for signs and symptoms. That's why we do next Tuesday at Common Ground, we're going to do the whole thing about what are the risk factors and protective factors. Stay connected to your kid. Remember, attachment is healing.
What age do the child lose also? So you said before the age of 18,
Yeah.
by the age of 16, in school.
Yes.
They already have.
Yes.
Is there a way that teachers?
Absolutely. Positive coping skills, right? To understand, here's the shift in the language. We used to say when behavior was bad behavior, we used to say, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Now we say, what happened to you? That takes the onus off the kid. They're not broken. They're not flawed. This behavior is a result of something that's come down probably through the family, probably through parenting, or circumstances like poverty. And there are things that you can do. So if you're interested, and schools are very interested in getting groups of kids, in fact, reducing suspension and detention, and giving kids opportunities to problem solve and build coping skills. That's much more happening in schools today than ever.
Can you interject for a second there, Mr. George?
Of course.
So, Ms. DeGennaro, I'm the student assistance counselor at the high school, and we're just actually unveiling a program here in the high school where we're creating mentorship programs for our students. So we identified, it's our kind of our initial step in this, but we've identified a group of students, and we have teachers now who are going to offer their time with these students to just offer a mentorship, meaning a connection with that student, because as George was talking about, having a connection with another adult outside of the home really helps their resiliency building. So we're trying to offer that here as well. We're really, we're trying to really identify in our schools how to keep our kids connected. And this is another way of us trying to attempt to create those connections with our kids. So it's a really exciting program. We're seriously at the very, very young stages of this, but it's also an opportunity. So even if they're not talking to you as a parent, encourage them to come and talk to someone in the school, because they do make connections with our teachers, with their counselors, with myself, with our security guards, cafeteria people, and it's really having that other connection with an adult, which also helps them get through some of their gunk. I call it their gunk. And sometimes the gunk can get overwhelming for them. So I wanted to also share that with you, because we're with George and all we're trying to accomplish, we're really trying to help our students make those connections.
Big message.
I'm hoping that it's something I know that's in the funny, but the other things that are important, like nutrition and the exercise and the mindfulness and the yoga, so we can learn to do it. I didn't know that. Sorry.
We work on those things, and a little tidbit for you. Take their cell phones when it's time to go to sleep. Take
Oh
them.
my God, no.
I'm sorry. I call myself caring. Take them away. They need to sleep. I see students all the time and they struggle. Adolescents need sleep. and they can't unplug, you have to help them unplug. It's really important to help them unplug.
Plug at school, we do that.
Can you?
I don't feel like we do that at Sunday school. We don't help them stay unplugged. My kid walks down the hall with their earbuds in. I walk in and I see her coming down the hall with her earbuds in, and I'm saying to the security guard, feel free to pull those for me, because, I mean, and they're texting with each other. They're not passing notes anymore. They're texting instead of passing notes.
So that sounds to me like it's a great suggestion for the school to kind of sit and say, hey, how do we do that? How do we minimize that? How do we shift? Because you're right, it falls in line with what we've been talking about tonight. How do you keep kids connected? And when they're only in their own head with their music or something else, they're not connected. So toss it back to you guys and say, listen.
But just to go by,
You tell her.
so what Carol was just saying about the mindfulness piece.
Yes.
So I know that at Jay's school, they have a grant, and they just got a mindfulness grant. Most of the elementary schools are doing things. I know they're doing calm schools at the intermediate school. We're doing yoga, we're doing mindfulness.
We just meditated.
So it's happening, bits and pieces, and we're trying to do those things. So eventually that we have all of our kids, obviously 6th through grade 12, have computers. We're fighting the battle of we fight the battle of no earbuds at the middle school, no earbuds, no cell phones during the day, but they got their computers so they can easily communicate. So we've done no technology day, so we're going back to old school for that.
I do think that is a big chunk when our one-to-one initiative started, that changed our lives. And managing that at home when it can be claimed as, I have to have this for school, it was a game changer. And it is a constant.
In a bad way.
Yeah, and that's why last year, probably this time, we did screen groups. So we had that movie, the PTO sponsored it, and we had a similar conversation. A lot of intermediate school parents were there, middle school parents, high school. I mean, that's the main group of it. Kind of talking the same types of things. That movie is based on she's a pediatrician. Yeah, pediatrician. And her study, in essence, as a mom, right? And then her doctor perspective of being off the devices and what they did with their family time. The dinner piece of it is huge, and having that you just did a whole week of it at Ben Franklin, no screen time.
I think technology hijacked us. I don't think we saw it coming. We saw it as pervasive, or we didn't understand the outcome. So now it's kind of like, well, this isn't good. This isn't healthy. It feels good for kids, but it isn't good as the outcome. So how do we have a reasonable conversation among adults to say, how do we march this back in a way that there's balance, right?
It's just like when you're not
Exactly.
say at 10 o'clock, all technology is downstairs for your next meeting. That's just.
Good. That's what we would wish that most families would do.
But it's hard. Because
Very difficult.
The school, it makes you feel like we're against one another when we're trying to stay in the same lane.
Yep.
Well, it's hard too because that's how they also communicate to study together.
Yes, that's right.
So they're studying for a test and they're communicating that way because they're either FaceTiming each other or they're texting each other back. Right. Yes, it is.
I get it, and it's very complex. I'm not suggesting there's a simple solution, but I am suggesting there is a solution when caring adults carve out some time to sit and say, this is problematic for our children, what are we going to do about it? And if we can pull some of our kids in to be a part of that so they have understanding and can be messengers for that, I think that's where the benefit comes for everybody. Thank you, you've been delightful. You talk too much, but you've been delightful. Questions were great, and thank you very much for coming out tonight.